Hi, I'm Nolly from GGD, and in this video I want to talk about capturing a great guitar tone off a mic'd up cab, specifically looking at just a single microphone placement for an amazing sound. Now the standard place that most people mic up a guitar speaker is right around the edge of the dust cap where it meets the cone. I've seen a few people talk about how it's worth experimenting, kind of going around the circumference of the dust cap, just to see if you get a different tone, because usually there is a bit of a difference, but I've not actually seen anyone talking about specifically why that happens. For the last couple of years, I've been doing a huge amount of experimentation with mic'd up cabs and trying to get the best guitar tone. And I came across something that's been staring us in the face the whole time, and I've just not seen anyone else talking about it, so I wanted to share it with you in this video. So when you look at a guitar speaker, you can see that it's more or less the same all the way around the cone, just with the exception of these two glue blobs there and there. Now pretty much every speaker has this. They've been built more or less the same way for decades, and this is just the way that it's always been done. And what's going on is we've got two wires coming off the voice coil in the back of the speaker. They come out, they pierce through an eyelet in the cone, and then they pop back again through another eyelet, and they're secured with glue. And then they continue on their way to the solder terminals here, where you then can hook up the positive and minus to the amplifier or to the other speakers in your cab. Now, if you palm mute a guitar string or you put a piece of moon gel on a drum head, what you do is you dampen the high overtones of the sound. So it's got less top end, or the top end is a lot shorter in length, and it tends to have the effect of putting more of your attention onto the fundamental note that's being played. And the exact same thing is happening here with the mass of these glue blobs on the cone. What they do is they dampen the vibrations of the high frequencies of the cone just at those spots. Now, you would never hear this from standing a few meters back from a cab. I mean, all the sound is getting dispersed and combined, and you're not going to zero in on the lack of top end just around there. But if you're close miking a speaker and you're putting a microphone right up in front of them, you can notice a really drastic difference in sound, whether you're over the top of one, close to one, or on the opposite side of the dust cap. Anyway, enough talking. I'm sure you want to hear some sound examples. To record these, I used a high gain guitar sound, and I did this because a signal that saturated basically gives you all of the frequencies all the time. It's not like a clean tone where you just get little bursts of top end on the pick attack. So it really means you can hear the nooks and crannies of the high frequencies of the guitar tone. For me, it's by far the best way of hearing the sonic fingerprint of your speaker and mic position. It's also worth noting that I used a robotic Dynamount mic stand to make sure that the microphone moves exactly the same distance to either side of the dust cap. This is really important because a movement of a couple of millimeters can really change the high end. So if you're going to do a test like this, it's good to be scientific and to even use the same microphone, because two different SM57s could sound different, for example. Anyway, let's get to it. Okay, so here we have 4 tracks, which will compare the non-blob and the blob sides of the speaker. The microphone is pretty much dead on the cap edge, exactly the same distance each way from the center of the speaker. So let's start with a mono single-tracked guitar and then go through the non-blob and blob versions. So first non-blob. And then on the blob side. And now I'll switch between the two fairly rapidly so you can hear them back to back. So that is in mono. Let's check out a pair of stereo panned guitars here so you can hear how that sounds, because I often find that's quite a different presentation of a tone when you hear 2 panned guitars instead of just one down the middle. Okay, so hopefully you'll agree with me that this is not a small difference. The first few times I did this test, I was so convinced that maybe I messed up the mic position, that it wasn't quite central to begin with. But I've repeated it loads of times on, probably at this point, hundreds of speakers, and 99% of the time, this is the kind of result you get. Now, when I'm listening in mono, or when I'm just capturing the tone for the first time, A lot of the time my ear actually gravitates towards the non-blob side, the brighter one. It just sounds a bit more exciting and aggressive. But I find that once the tone is double tracked or you try to put it into the mix, that stuff that sounds exciting about the non-blob guitar tone turns out to just be kind of unwanted noise and this kind of hashy top end, whereas that much smoother top end that you get on the blob side just sits into the mix. You rarely need to low pass your guitars. And because of the fact that it doesn't have these really shrill, piercing, high frequencies that you get with a lot of mic'd up guitar tones, or it's got very reduced high frequency overtones like that, you can then boost the air into the top end of the guitar tone with an EQ after the fact, and it doesn't get harsh at all. And remember, we're just talking about a single SM57 here. I mean, this microphone is often blamed for being kind of fizzy sounding, and a lot of producers might blend in a darker sounding microphone or another SM57 on a darker part of the speaker or an angle to try and cut a bit of that top end. But for me, you can get a really great sound with just that one microphone if you go to the blob side where the tone is just generally a bit darker. So one question is, how do you easily find these blobs through the grille of a cab? I mean, especially if you've got a cab with a basket weave grille, it can be very difficult to see through. And well, the general rule of thumb is that they're going to be directly over where the terminals are on the back of the speaker. On most cabs like 4x12s and 2x12s, the speakers are positioned so that they're in pairs horizontally. So you get the terminals facing towards each other, so the wires are nice and short. So from the front of the cab, you'll get the blobs kind of doing that towards each other on a 4x12. There is an exception. Now, Mesa Boogie cabs, for some reason, are rotated, like the speakers are rotated 45 degrees. So actually the blobs tend to be vertically upwards across on the bottom and vertically downwards and across on the top, which is actually quite useful because it's a bit easier to find that plane. And if you've got a 1x12 or a 2x12 combo, oftentimes the blobs are going to be going vertically upwards because the solder terminals typically need to face up towards the amplifier for the shortest distance. If in doubt though, by far the easiest thing is just to take off the back of your cab if you can't see into it and see where those terminals are. Now, do you need to be pointing exactly at one of these glue blobs to get the effect? I mean, I think the most drastic effect is, yeah, when you're directly over one. But generally, anywhere on the side that has the blobs, and particularly between the two of them, is where you'll get the darker sound, whereas on the opposite side, as far away from the two blobs as you can go, will be generally the brightest sound. So, you know, on most cabs where you've kind of got them going a bit up and down, kind of diagonally from the cap, I'll just aim for the area between them. But like I mentioned with Mesa Boogie cabs, you can go directly across and get dead onto a blob there. And of course, as always, if you need a brighter sound, you can move the microphone a bit closer onto the center of the speaker. But bear in mind that the closer you go to the middle, the less of a difference you're going to get between the sides. It's also worth saying that this works for all types of speaker that have this kind of construction. So that's, you know, everything from vintage to modern speakers, greenbacks, vintage 30s, even the models with larger dust caps like the G1265s, the T75s or the K100s. That large dust cap actually covers over the glue blobs, but they're still there underneath it. Before thinking about this, I guess I always used to intuitively mic up guitar speakers on the far side, as far away from the other speakers as I could go. I thought there might be some benefit to that. And I always felt like my tones were perhaps a bit fizzier than I wanted them to be. So once I discovered that going on the opposite edge gave you a darker sound, I started to really like the guitar tones I was capturing. So it was a bit of a revelation for me. The funny thing is I've spoken to a few people that just kind of intuitively gravitated towards the inside edge of the cap and were miking up close to glue blobs, and they always felt like their tones were a bit too dark. So I guess the grass is always greener either way. So whether you prefer the blob or the non-blob sound, I guess the most important thing is that with this information, perhaps you can reduce the amount of trial and error involved in getting the tones that you want out of a guitar cab. I think this kind of knowledge can be crucial to reducing frustration and just generally making engineering a bit more quick so you can enjoy the process. Now, as game-changing as this information was for me when I figured it out, it doesn't instantly give you the perfect guitar tone because every speaker sounds unique. Every glue blob is going to have a slightly different mass, and that's going to dampen to different amounts, and then the combination of two on this already hugely complex system of vibrations and resonances that is a guitar speaker just adds to this almost infinitely complicated system. And then there's, you know, different cabinet types, different microphones. You could start double miking and prioritizing which goes on the dark side of the speaker. There's still a lot of fun to be had in finding the cabinet that you like the most, the speaker that you like the most, the microphones that you like the most, the position that you like the most, and then of course everything that comes after you capture the raw guitar tone too. So Best of luck with your tone quest, and I hope that you found this informative.